Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. Today we will continue with our topic 7, structural modeling. And these are our learning outcomes for today's lecture. So at the end of this class, you should be able to explain how the concept of things in the problem domain also define the requirements. Second, identify and analyze data entities and domain classes needed in the system. Third, read, interpret, and create an ERD. And lastly, on the domain model class diagram. First, let's look into what are the things in the problem domain. Okay, by definition, things are the items or domain classes or data entities that users deal to perform their work in the context of systems problem domain that need to be remembered. Okay, what is the problem domain? The specific area of the user's business that is within the scope of the new system. So things, the items, okay, or the entities, the domain classes that user deal to perform their work. What are the examples of things? Okay, for example, products, sales, shippers, customers, invoices, payment, students, staff, costs, okay, and many more. So that are things in the problem domain. How to identify things in the problem domain? So we have two techniques. The first one is brainstorming technique, and the second one is the noun technique. So brainstorming, we brainstorm with the team in an open group settings, while the noun technique, we find and classify nouns in the dialogue or a description. So usually noun technique without the user's involvement. First, let's look into the brainstorming technique. So in this figure, it shows some types of things to consider that can be used to systematically help users do brainstorming. Okay, for example, we have the tangible things that are the things that are obvious that can be seen, and then we have the roles played, okay, the actors, the possible actors, and then we have the organizational unit, the devices that could be used, the sites or location, and lastly the incidents, events or interactions. And these are the example of things that might help during the brainstorming technique. Okay, and what are the steps in brainstorming technique? First, we need to identify a user or users and set of use cases. Okay, so in the last chapter, we have identified our actor and also the use case. We have developed our use case diagram. So we have done with the first step. And then next, the second step, brainstorm with the user to identify things involved when carrying out the use case. So when we want to carry out this use case, okay, so we identify what are the things involved. Okay, that is things about which information should be captured by the system. So there are some information that are not needed in the system, so we will exclude that thing. Okay. Third, use the types of things in this diagram, this one, the types of things, to systematically ask questions about potential things such as, are there any tangible things you store information about, or are there any locations involved? What are the roles played by people that you need to remember? And next, continue to work with all types of users and stakeholders to expand the brainstorming list. So from the previous figure, so we continue to work with all of the users and also stakeholders. And lastly, we merge the result, we eliminate any duplicates and compile an initial list of the things. So that is brainstorming technique. Okay, next, the noun technique. What is the noun technique? A technique to identify problem domain classes or things by finding, classifying, and refining a list of nouns that come up in discussions or documents. So in this technique, we identify what are the nouns that come out during our discussion or in the document. Okay, this is very popular technique and systematic, but it does end up with a long list and many nouns that are not things that need to be stored by the system. So when we are using the noun technique, we tend to list all or too many nouns, okay? And some of these nouns might not be related to the system. And it leads to the difficulty in identifying synonyms and things that are really attributes. However, it is a good place to start when there are no users available to help during the brainstorming. And these are the techniques for the noun technique. First, by using the use cases, actors, and also the other information, including input and output, we identify all nouns. Let's say in our use case, okay, let's say we have generate invoice. Okay, this is our use case. Generate invoice. So remember, during the use case development, the use case diagram development, we need to use the formatting of the verb noun. Okay, verb noun. So the noun here is invoice. Okay, invoice. And then we have actor. Let's say employee. So we list the employee as the noun. So now we have two nouns, invoice and also employee. And if we have any other information about the system, then we identify all nouns. Second, using other information from existing systems, current procedures, and current reports or forms, add items or categories of information needed. And as the list of nouns builds, we need to refine it. And we create a master list of all nouns identified and then note whether each one should be included, excluded, or need to be researched further. And lastly, we review the list with the users, with the stakeholders and the team members, and then define the list of things in the problem domain. Okay, so after we have identified all the nouns, okay, all the nouns from all sources of information that we have, and then we create a master list and then identify or categorize it into either it should be included, excluded, or need to do the research further. So noun that will be included usually is a unique noun and within the scope of the system, and we need to remember more than one of these items. For example, our noun is employee. So we need to identify either is this a unique noun within the scope, and do we need to remember the employee details? So if yes, then we will include it in our domain class. Okay, what are the things or what are the nouns that should be excluded? Maybe the synonym to the other noun that has been included here. Okay, so if it is synonym, so we will exclude it. And if it is output produced from another information, so we need to exclude it. Or is it the input that results in recording some other information? So it should be included. For example, report. So report is produced from the other information. For example, we want to generate report about student CGPA. Okay, student CGPA. Okay, we will generate this report from class for example, results. Okay, we have results. Result is included, for example, and then we want to generate a report from this noun. Okay, so usually if it is the output produced from another information, let's say we generate the information based on this noun, then we do not need to include the report in our noun list. And lastly, research, is it likely to be a specific piece of information or attribute about some other thing I have identified? Okay, so you need to identify, is it the attribute? What are the example of the attributes? For example, address, employee address. So address can be just an attribute, but it could be a noun or a class. Okay, so we need to check either we will store more than one addresses for one employee. So if yes, then we will put it here. But if not, then we will exclude it. But during the early phase of the noun identification, so we put it in the research section because we want to confirm it later. And if it is something that you need, if assumption change, so you need to identify it and need to do some researches on these things. Okay, this is the example of a use case diagram and also the domain model class diagram. Okay, let's say we have the use case for PMC management system. Okay, here remember, if we are using the noun technique, so we need to check our use case diagram and also the actors and identify the noun. So for example, we have nurse, we have doctor, and then we have patient, we have record. Okay, we have appointment, we have medical record, and we have prescription. Okay, so from this noun, okay, we transform it into our domain class diagram. Okay, so these are the things, okay, the things that we identified based on this use case diagram. Okay, but before we come up with the domain model class diagram, we might have a list of this noun. Okay, and then we identify either all of this noun need to be included in the system. So if yes, then as per I told you before, then we put it under include section, and then we put it out in our model class, the domain model class diagram. Okay, in this example, we have nurse and doctor, but here we have only staff. Okay, so during the identification of noun, then you need to identify either we need to put it we need to put both in different classes or in one class. So in this example, we put it in one class and we identify nurse and doctor as one thing, so staff. After we have identified all the things that will be included in our domain class, the next step is we need to identify the attributes and also the association. Okay, first let's look at into what is attribute. Attribute describes one piece of information about each instance of the class. For example, customer has first name, last name, and phone number. So these are the attribute. So second, we need to identify the identifier or key. One attribute uniquely identifies an instance of the class. We need to identify what is the primary key that can be used to identify the thing. For example, customer ID is the identifier or key for identifying a customer. And we also have the compound attribute. So what is compound attribute? Two or more attributes combined into one structure to simplify the model. For example, address. We can separate the address into street, city, state, zip, but we combine it into one structure to simplify the model. And instead of we separate it, we just use address as the compound attribute. These are the example of the attributes and also the values. So all customer have these attributes: customer ID, first name, last name, home phone, and also work phone. And what is the value for each attribute? Okay, for example, customer ID 101. His first name is John, last name Smith, and this is the home phone and this is the work phone. So, and we have Mary with her customer ID and last name, home phone, and work phone. So these are the attributes and these are the value for the attribute. Next, the association among things. What is association? Association is a UML term that describes a naturally occurring relationship between specific things. In this example, we have this order ID, order number. So this order is placed by Mr. Smith. And Mr. Smith works in accounting department. So this is what we call it as association. Associations and relationships apply in two directions, so we need to read them separately each way. For example, a customer places an order. An order is placed by a customer. So by reading in two directions, we can identify what is the relationship of this statement. Next, the cardinality or multiplicity is a measure of links between one object and another object in a relationship or association. And in UML, we use the term multiplicity and association instead of relationship and cardinality. So in UML, we will use these terms. And we have the database management, which we use the term cardinality and relationship. Next, let's look at into the minimum and maximum multiplicity. Associations have minimum and maximum constraints. Minimum is 0, so the association is optional. But if the minimum is at least 1, the association is mandatory. So in this example, Mr. Jones has placed no order yet, but there might be many placed over time. So it means the multiplicity is 0 or more, and it is an optional relationship because here it stated that Mr. Jones has placed no order yet, but maybe in the future he will place many orders. So it is 0 or more. Second, a particular order is placed by Mr. Smith. There can't be an order without stating who the customer is. So the multiplicity is 1 and only 1, and it is mandatory relationship. Third, an order contains at least one item, but it could contain many items. So it is 1 or more because it is at least 1, but it could contain many items. So it is 1 or more, and it is a mandatory relationship because must has at least 1. Next, the types of association. We have the binary association. This is the common association. So association between exactly two different clauses. What are the clauses? So clauses are the things that we have finalized and we put it in our domain class diagram. So we call it as clauses. For example, the binary association course section includes students, members, join club. So this association is between two different classes. Exactly two different classes. Second, we have the unary association, or we call it as recursive association between two instances of the same class. Okay, so let's say we have person married to person. So we call this as recursive. Person married to person, recursive. The association is between two instances of the same class. Part is made using part, so we have recursive. If the association is between three classes, then we call it as ternary association, and if it is more than three, we call it as n-ary association. Okay, in the next video, we will continue with the ERD and also the domain class diagram. See you in the next video.